What up? What up? So in Matthew chapter 26, there's a lady, and she has this expensive oil, this expensive perfume or fragrant oil, and it's an alabaster jar. And Jesus is sitting back at the table reclining. And what she does is she pours the oil on Jesus. And so his disciples start getting upset, and they're all like, she could have sold this oil and took the money and gave it to the poor. But Jesus tells them to leave her alone. He says, for one, you're going to always have the poor with you. I'm not going to always be here. For two, he says she's doing a good work on me. And then he says she's doing this for my burial. He also says that whoever tells this story is going to also tell the story about her as a memorial to her. Now, two things I want to point out about what Jesus said. One was that he said she was doing a good work on him. So we all know when we go to work, if you go to work, you have a job to do. That's just like saying the job that she had to do, right? He even gave the purpose of her job. He said it had something to do with his burial. Said she was preparing him for his burial. So he told what she was doing, and he told why she was doing it. He said she's doing a work for me. So when you do something that the Lord wants you to do, that's called being obedient. And she was being obedient. She did the job that she was supposed to do, even though people around her were upset about it. Now, the people around her, they would have rather her sold that alabaster jar and took the money and gave it to the poor. Now, if she had done that, it would have been her money because it was hers. She's the one that brought the alabaster. As far as we know, it was hers. If she had sold it, it would have been her money. And then she would have given it to the poor, so it would have been a sacrifice that she had made. In this particular passage, it clearly shows that obedience is better than sacrifice. Another example of that, 1 Samuel chapter 15. There is King Saul. God ordered King Saul to kill everyone in a certain town or village and to kill the animals as well. But King Saul didn't do this. He killed the people. He left the king alive, but he plundered the animals. And when the prophet Samuel approached him and asked him, he said, why did you do this, Saul? Why did you not obey God? And Saul responded and said, I was trying to keep these animals so that we can do a sacrifice, so that we can give them as burnt offerings to God. And Samuel responded to Saul and said, do you really believe that sacrifice is better than obeying the voice of the Lord? Another example would be in, I think that one is Matthew, it might be Mark chapter 12. You might have to look that one up. But another example is when Jesus was talking to I think it's Mark chapter 12. He was talking to the scribes. These are the people that had something to do with the law, with the laws. And the scribes, they had asked Jesus a question. They wanted to know what was the greatest of all the commandments. And Jesus explained to them, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. He said the second greatest commandment is like this: love your neighbor as you love yourself. Well, one of the scribes responded to Jesus and said, you have spoken correctly. He said, because it is much better than all the offerings, all the burnt offerings and sacrifices. It is much better than all of those. It's much better to love God and to love your neighbors. And Jesus responded to him and said, you are not far from the kingdom of heaven. So again, these are just other examples of showing that obedience is better than sacrifice. And the reason why I use the example of love is because one of the things that Jesus says is that the first commandment is to love God. Well, Jesus also says that those who love him, God the Son, those who love him will keep the commandments. Those who love him will obey him. So again, obedience will always be greater than sacrifice. Let me give you one more example. Somebody might say, Christ's sacrifice, there's nothing greater than that. But at the same time, Christ committed the ultimate sacrifice, but his sacrifice would not have happened had he not been obedient. When he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he made it very clear. He said, Lord, will you take this cup from me? He said, but nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. So Jesus basically said to God in the Garden of Gethsemane, he said, I don't want to do this, but since you want me to do this, I'm going to go ahead and do this. So if it wasn't for his obedience and his love for the Father, he would not have done what he came here to do. So again, obedience is better than sacrifice. One more thing I want to point out about what the scribe said about how all the burnt offerings and all the sacrifice will not be greater than loving God. Always remember that no matter how much you give to the poor, no matter how much you give to the church, no matter how much you sacrifice, no matter how much you do, it will never be greater than obedience. It will never be greater than obedience. God wants you to hear his word and obey his word. If Jesus hadn't obeyed, we wouldn't be saved. If Abraham hadn't had faith that was counted as obedience, the tribes of Israel would never have came to be, and we would have never replaced them. That's all I got for y'all, man. Love God, love your neighbors, and be blessed.